Ladies and gentlemen, I am excited to have Ken Kortman with Kortman Electric on the podcast today. So, sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. I always start with kind of what your work history is, employment history, kind of the story of how you got to where you are today, and then if you could kind of go into a little bit about what Kortman Electric does.
Okay, sounds great. The work history for me came right out of high school. My dad decided to start his own electrical company. He had been in the industry his whole career and worked for several different people and decided to go out on his own. So when I graduated from high school, I was a little weary of school and didn't want to start college right away. So I said, let me stay out for a year and I'll help you. And then after that, I'm going to go back and get my degree. He sort of chuckled at me because he says, once you're out making money, you're not going to go back to school. So I sort of took that as a challenge and helped him for the first year. And he was starting out building his business, and we were working usually 6, sometimes 7 days a week, as you can imagine, trying to get a business going. And I began to learn a little bit more about the trade. And as that 1 year anniversary came up, school was getting ready to start, and I already had the itch to stay working, and I liked the money I was making. But I knew I had to challenge and meet the expectations and prove my dad wrong. So I did go to ASU and ended up staying there and got a business degree and worked the whole time for my dad, with the intention that once I got out of ASU, which I did in 1987, that I would go on to do other things that were more interesting to me. But by that time, I was 4 years now into the electrical trade, actually 5 years, and my course had already kind of begun to take shape. I was at that point sort of a journeyman electrician and being given opportunities now to lead small groups of guys on job sites and stuff, and I kind of liked that leadership and a chance to grow, and I was sort of forced to learn really quickly. During those first 4 years when Dad was trying to drum up business, it was not very infrequent where he would drop me off at a place and tell me what it needed to get done, and he'd disappear for 2 or 3 hours to go find the next job. And so here I was being forced to figure out how I was going to get the work done and how I needed to make things work. So I learned on the job sort of forcefully, right? So I jumped into the deep end and had to swim my way to the surface. And I think in hindsight, that was probably the best thing my dad could have done for me, because I had to learn it on my own. I had to learn it really quickly. So from there, I decided at that time when I graduated that I was going to stick with this for a while. I started to see, well, maybe there's a future for me if I stick with this, and Dad eventually wants to retire, then I would be able to take a business over, which I thought was pretty cool to have a chance to own my own business. So I stuck with it and worked my way through the different positions in the company, from managing all of the field crews to purchasing and doing a lot of business development, and Dad just kind of kept pushing me out there. And then in 1990, Dad began a transition of moving from Phoenix to Payson, and he did that and actually ended up moving up there full time. And so at that point, Dad's presence here in Phoenix, where all the guys and the crews and the office staff were used to seeing him as leadership, suddenly he was out of town. And this was before you could do so much electronically, so we would have to pack up a set of drawings, a construction drawings, and put it on a bus to Payson, and he would take that set of drawings out and tell us how much our work was going to cost. He'd roll it back up, send it back down here, and then we would turn a number into a general contractor for trying to win work. And that's what we did for about 10 years. And the blessing behind all of that was, because he was not in the office, people began to lean into me, and my brothers had now come along, and so we were not necessarily in our president role or in executive roles, but people began to lean into us because Dad just wasn't physically at the office. So as time went along, I had 2 brothers and a brother-in-law join. So as Dad began to consider retirement in 2000, we sort of already had our roles established, the 4 of us, and so it went from Generation 1, Dad, to Generation 2, which was myself and three brothers. So when Dad retired, we didn't really feel a huge transition from our own team, because we'd already been sort of in that leadership role for about 10 years now. And so when Dad retired, it wasn't a huge transition for our office team, as a lot of companies have when a major founder retires. So that's kind of how we journeyed through it. So here we are about 38 years later, and we are continuing to expand our market. And now my oldest son is working for us, coming up through the trade, and I started with his school at going through a soccer scholarship, and when he got done with his soccer in college, decided to come work, and so we put him on board, and he's doing really, really well, now managing all of our work out at Sky Harbor Airport, and he will, our plan is to eventually transition this from Generation 2 to Generation 3. And so the timing of that will probably depend on how quickly he drives me out the door, right? And I'm okay with that. I'm excited for his opportunity, and my brothers are excited to see that we have a chance to maybe let this company continue to be someone that John can build on and have a future for our employees for a long time. So that's kind of how we are, how we formed and how we got to where we are. What we do, we sort of built our business on the electrical industry, mostly in the commercial and industrial markets. We were really never in the residential market per se. And that's really was our mainstay for the first, I would say, 30 years of our business. And around year 30, we saw the need with some of the cycles of the economy going up and down, and we had weathered all of those ups and downs for those 30 years. But we saw the need just to diversify a little bit, and we began a service department that would operate 24/7. Again, mostly to the commercial and industrial clients, but we were getting calls occasionally from residential friends, people that knew the business, people that knew the family or had connections somehow, and we would take care of their residential issues as well. And so the service department started about 8 years ago and really began to expand the number of clients and the kind of market we were after. And that's still going really, really strong today. And then about 5 years ago, we had an opportunity to bring in a company that was getting ready to go sort of out and under, and they had been in business for many, many years. And they do what we call the low voltage industry, which is all of your special systems, your everything from phones to cameras to security to Wi-Fi, things of the internet, right, is what we would call that. And we had a chance to bring that team in about 5 years ago. Well, it really took off for us, and we now expand into that market quite a bit, and it's probably one of the more dynamic markets that we live in. And so we sort of have those three as our main verticals: our standard electrical service, our services, our 24/7 emergency service, and then our new low voltage division. So that's kind of where we are and how we go to market.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
At the beginning, how was the relationship with your dad when you were working? Because I know, like, when you're younger, coming out of high school, obviously there's the father-son relationship, and then as you start to mature, especially, there can be sometimes for different people, they can kind of run into conflicts with each other, especially in a business setting. So was everything pretty smooth as far as your relationship there, or was it kind of like, hey, at a certain point you're like, Dad, I'd kind of like my shot at this, or how did that go?
Well, it's a great question. I always had a good relationship with my dad growing up, but he was also a very hardworking man. So it was not uncommon for Dad, after dinner, when we were doing homework as kids, for Dad to be back at the kitchen table doing work at night. That was a very common thing to see my dad. And if we had games on weekends, my dad would always be at the games. But if there was any time that my dad could go back to the office for a little bit, my dad worked really hard. And so I saw that my whole life, and it was a work ethic that he instilled into all of us. And so when he started the business, again, I didn't really want to go to school right away, so I was okay having a job with him. I learned pretty quickly that the pressures of starting a business took a toll on my relationship with my dad. But in hindsight, now that I look back at it, it's all healthy things, right? Things that I learned how to focus, learned how to be able to work on my own and figure things out. But at the time, it was stressful.
Right.
I was dating my future wife at the time, and she was starting nursing school, so she was very busy with, her schooling and her new friends that she had been making. And here I was working for my dad and working 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and didn't have a lot of free time because we were always concerned about having work for the next day. So it strained our relationship at the time. I think I didn't really enjoy always working for my dad. He had a lot of pressure, and he sometimes would vent that pressure on me if I didn't have a job done on time or if it didn't have it done correctly. There was a lot of pressure because we needed to be profitable at that point just to make next steps in the business. Again, looking back now 30 years, some odd later, all of those were teaching tools that God used in my life. And I know he was seasoning me and shaping my dad as well. But it was stressful.
Right.
As I began to take some leadership roles and Dad was still here in town, I felt the mentoring time with him, and I always valued that time because I was usually in the field all day with the crews, and I might get the last hour of the day in the office with Dad, and I always saw his work ethic and his leadership, and the people always admired him. And so I began to feel the impact of having good quality leadership skills that my dad had, and I was able to absorb some of that. And then as Dad moved away, we recognized that we had to step up, right? We either had to change the office environment to what we wanted, or we had to continue this great legacy that he had built, and we chose to continue the great legacy. So all in all, I have a great relationship with my dad and my mom. I'm grateful for parents that sacrificed so much, right? It's kind of like we often use the example of planting a tree, right? In their stage of the business, when they were trying to grow it, there wasn't much shade. Now that tree has developed and grown for 38 years, we receive a lot of the blessings of the shade of that tree. And now we're trying to make sure those roots grow deep, and we're able to sustain that to the next generation.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you said you've got 3 brothers who came in, and they're in the executive role now. So how was that relationship at the beginning, and then how is that relationship now? Because it's kind of like you said, when it's with your dad, it's one thing to have a boss where you can go home and you can get away from them on the weekends. You don't have to think about them on holidays, but we've got Thanksgiving around the corner right now. It's like you're seeing the guy who's leading the company at Thanksgiving, so anything that came out of work might be also at the Thanksgiving table.
Yeah.
So was there anything similar with the experience with the brothers as far as like, hey, we're gonna have to work on our relationship in a specific way to make sure that if anything happens at work, that stays at work and we're still family and love each other outside of it?
I think Dad instilled that in us pretty quickly, that to be in business together would create some unique challenges, and we were going to have to manage through and understand, let's not lose focus of who we work for, and that our business is all belongs to the Lord, and we're here to be good stewards of that, and not to let our egos get in the way. So I'm extremely blessed that my 2 brothers and brother-in-law, they're all believers. They all understand the importance of knowing why we're in business and what God is doing in our work. And so to have that common ground, I can't describe the importance and the foundation that sets, that we don't have somebody that's after an ego run, right? Somebody that wants something different than the other one. So we have a good relationship, all of us. It's funny, when you work together every day, the holidays seem different, right? Because we see each other all the time. So when the Thanksgivings and the Christmas or the birthday parties roll around, it's not like we're catching up on everything.
Right.
We've already been caught up.
And,
But in all of those years, we honestly have never had a single point where we have not been able to find agreement and alignment. Sure, we have differences of opinions or perspectives, but we've managed through every single one of those, and we have been blessed, because I know lots of companies where it shatters, right?
Yep.
It shatters in that second generation where Dad set something up. But we've been blessed, and all of the second generation, myself and my brothers, are really excited about the third generation. He's gifted, he's talented, and he's got a really solid head on his shoulders, and he's not looking for the easy road, like a lot of third generations can sometimes fall into, where, hey, everything's been established, I'm just going to ride the wave.
right.
We're excited because the third generation has the same work ethic, has the same foundation that my dad poured into me. And so, we have managed through all of the strains of having a family business, and we're blessed, because I know it's not very typical and it's not very common.
Yeah. And then you mentioned with your dad moving up north, that kind of helped the transition. did that make everything pretty smooth for the most part? Were there any hiccups along the way, or was it a pretty seamless kind of like, all right, everyone, even from the customers to the employees, has seen what the management, gotten a preview of what the management would look like as the keys kind of got handed down?
I think you hit it right on the head there. I think that transition of about 10 years before Dad retired and him being up in Payson, that began the transition of how people saw the next generation of leadership. Even though we weren't in necessarily those roles with that kind of decision making, we were already sort of leading the office, and people were having to interact with us now as Dad was out of town. But really the transition for the team in the office went just as smooth as the transition to the second generation, because we were already there, already doing it. It didn't seem like we suddenly had this big gap. Were there some bumps along the road here and there? Yeah, there were some longtime employees that would sometimes say, hey, your dad used to say this, or your dad would always do this time of year. And some of those things are good because they open your eyes and they give you somebody else's perspective, and those are healthy. And there's other times where you just have to respectfully say, hey, you know what, that's really good, but we're on a different path now, right? We're on a different track. Yep. And so again, what we didn't want to lose was the culture that Dad had set in the company, which was one of we work for the Lord. And we certainly don't have all believers in my company, but we have a good foundation of a lot of believers that are there, and the culture that we try to set is around our faith. And so there are things that we know we won't participate in, certain types of projects that people want maybe sometimes our services for, because we're not going to go in that kind of an industry. It's not who we represent. It's not, and we wouldn't find the Lord being pleased in those things. But yeah, that culture that Dad set continues to be, like I say, we just try to grow deep roots every day and set that up where we can honor and please the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you bring in employees, and then you mentioned the acquisition of the company, and I know with the acquisition you have people coming in, but with the training that you do for the employees, do you like to start with a blank slate? Do you like to start with experience? I know people have different philosophies on how they like to do that, because obviously with an experienced person, hopefully everything's just going to be hit the ground running a lot faster. But if you start with a blank slate, obviously it's the more time invested, but you can train them the way that you want your company to run it. Do you guys have kind of a formula on that? Is it a little bit of both? And then also, is it is the expectation a little different because you have a group of, basically you have a contingent of your family that is all on the same page with here's how we work, and then when other people have to come in, it's like, hey, this is how the family works. Maybe your family work different, but we need you to get in line with how we operate.
Sure. Another great question. I think when we evaluate our team every year, we want opportunities for every individual to grow. Where do you want to go? How can we help you get there? It doesn't mean that we can meet sometimes all of their expectations, right? Something may not fall into line with the overall goal of the company, or it's outside of something I can do for them, right? If somebody wanted my role as president and CEO, well, that's pretty well established that that's going to be transferred down to a generation 3. But I think people recognize that there's leadership in place at the ownership level, and there's probably not opportunities there. So if that's something that they're aspiring to, then if there's other things that they can come in and do as a way and a means to eventually go start their own business, we're not going to squash that. I think that's a neat opportunity. We obviously see the blessings of being in business, and so if we can help facilitate that for somebody else. But our growth, if at all possible, I like our growth to come from within. So we usually look internal first for any opportunity for somebody to step into a new role or an elevated role to continue to grow and learn. So that's always our goal. Now, I say that, but in a smaller company of 75 people, that sometimes can be harder than a company of several hundred or several thousand, where there's easy paths to grow and to learn and to move from division to division. We don't have a lot of those same opportunities in a smaller company, but at the same time, I don't want to squash somebody's dream to learn and to develop. And some people want that their entire career, and some people have a milestone they want to get to, and that's where they want to stay and be comfortable. And that's okay, as long as they're growing and meeting the expectations of their role. So we'll always look internal first. Now, if I'm looking outside, which is more common in our field where we're getting craftsmen. Then the same thing is we're obviously looking for talented people that know how to do our work, but more importantly is what kind of culture are they bringing to the company? Is this somebody that can sense and see the culture and what's been established here and will, either immediately or over time be willing to work within that culture and see the importance of helping support that and to grow that? To me, that's more important than how gifted they are with the tools or how gifted they are in knowing how to put together a spreadsheet. If someone's not going to fit culturally, it's probably not going to be a good hire in the long run for you. So we do look internal, but we also look external, but we spend a lot of time trying to understand the person of who we're hiring and how well will they fit with our team.
Right. And then I feel like a lot of people, culture is a huge buzzword for businesses, but I feel like some people understand it, some people don't, some people just throw it around willy-nilly. But how do you guys define what culture looks like for you? I know you've talked about the faith being, your faith and your brother's faith being a huge part of that bleeding over into a lot of your employees, even if they aren't, if they don't hold to the same beliefs that you do, and then as well as working hard. But are there any other tenets that you guys really try and dig into for them to say, hey, this is what we're about?
Yeah, I think that you can look at a mission statement, you can look at core values, and we have both of those in our company. And those are carefully worded. Those are often reviewed to make sure that they're accurate and define who we are. And you certainly build around those things. You want to educate your team on those things. You want to discuss them often and make sure that that becomes the foundation of your environment. But that doesn't necessarily set culture.
Yes.
Right? Those are just words that you try to make sure your actions follow.
Right.
But when I think of culture, which as in my role at the company, that's my job, is to protect culture and to strategically plan for the future. Where are we going? And so when I think of culture, I can't leave that word without understanding who I am in Christ. And so if I don't have that at least understood as my baseline, and don't get me wrong, I'm not, I have to every day take up my cross and follow Him, right? It's a work in motion, and my faith and my development in Christ. But if I don't have that as a baseline, as a line in the sand, then culture really is not definitive for me. And so again, not necessarily having all believers in the company, but I want my words and my actions to represent that. Not that I want to browbeat them with my faith, but I need to make sure they understand that my culture is not just a series of words or a couple of lines in my job description. It needs to carry through with how I act, how I present myself. They will often have to hear me take on a challenge, right, or take on an opportunity that's outside of what we do, and to turn those things down and to do that with professionalism, and at the same time try and let people know why we won't do some of those things they're asking us to do. I don't think construction is different than most other industries, right? There's always opportunities for corruption and gray areas and stuff, and we certainly have those. But when you don't think people are watching and paying attention, they're watching and paying attention.
Right.
So, and that's what I really like about my ownership team, my brothers, is that we all feel the same way, and we're all imperfect people, but culture is set by the way you act, by how you respond, by your emotions, by your body language, by your compassion for your people. And one of the ways that we help reinforce our culture is, as with most healthcare plans, there's always sort of an employee assistance program where people can reach out. And we have that in our healthcare program, but that's usually a civic program. That's not a faith-based program. Well, several years ago, probably close to 12 years ago, we brought in a chaplain who is not on our staff. He has a chaplaincy program. But he comes in once a week and just has freedom to move around the office and meet with our team. He will also go to our job sites once a month or so and meet with our guys in the field, with the idea that that's a confidential, it costs nothing to the employee. We pay the chaplain a fee every month to be available. And I can't tell you over those 12 years how many times people have either said to me, texted me, left me voicemails, emailed me, about how much they appreciate the fact that we would provide that kind of service, because again, this is a confidential way for them just to process life. And some of them are believers and they understand Daniel's perspective of faith on his response to life's crises, but a lot of them are not believers. And Daniel has a way of just coming in and just opening the door to share his faith and to share why we can lean in to the Lord when we have either the highs and lows of life, and we all have those. And so the impact that having a chaplain in our company the last 12 years, again, reinforces the culture of people are important to us, right? This is more about eternity than it is about getting somebody's lights turned on. Yes, we need to get somebody's lights turned on, but we want to be a company that represents the bigger goal. It's like, how can we influence people to want to know more about Christ or build their faith? And we don't do that on our strength. We do that on what the Lord provides opportunity to us, and we just try to be faithful to that opportunity.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of companies, when they think of culture, they think of just throwing the words on the wall. And they forget that, no, it's the action that is required with it, but then it's the action repeated over and over throughout the years. And especially when, like in business, it's not like a sports game where it's going to be over in 4 quarters or 3 periods or whatever it is. It's like, no, this, if you're in the game, it's still going. And so it's continually hammering that.
Yes.
So I haven't heard anyone mention having a chaplain or even like I'd probably say maybe you've heard of like a counselor before at some like the larger companies, if it was like a Google or an Apple or something like that. But where did you guys get that idea to have someone to come in once a week and then in the field once a month?
Well, we had a supplier by the name of that many years ago called Edson Electric, and Brad and Brett Edson introduced me to the concept as they had a chaplain serving their business. And at first I was a little bit resistant because I felt like, well, God, that's what you have me here for. People know I love you and people know I care about them. They should come to me. And it didn't take me long to realize that employees typically aren't going to go to their employer, right? That's just they feel too vulnerable and they feel exposed. So I agreed to try it for a year. And Daniel came in, our chaplain. It didn't take me more than a couple of months to realize the impact he was already having. We had a time back in probably 10, 12 years ago when the economy dipped pretty hard and we were having to downsize. There was just not a lot of work out there, and we got down to about as small as we could be. And I did a little survey among our team and just asked, hey, what other types of concerns, how can I help navigate this really tough economy right now? And the number one thing that came back is, please don't get rid of the chaplain. Please don't get rid of the chaplain. And at that time, we were trying to cut costs everywhere. And honestly, I don't think it ever became a point where we thought about it, but at the same time, it just reinforced that Daniel was making an impact with our team. And so often when he comes through the office or if he visits a job site, sometimes there's people around, and Daniel will say, hey, could we talk after work? And Daniel will answer calls all night long. He'll answer calls after work. And I think that's the other thing with culture is not Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Culture is 7 days a week, right? You really have to care about your people and try to help navigate life with them and encourage them, right? And hopefully have a chance to say, hey, this is what gives me peace in times of crisis, right? And then point them to the Lord. So for me personally, Daniel has done 2 funerals for my family that we needed somebody just to officiate a funeral. He's been to the hospital for my family, and I know he's done it for so many of our employees, right? They've visited hospitals and visited family members in prison even at times, or in nursing homes, right? Caring for our employees and their parents and things like that. So it's just a way to say, let us walk life with you and give you some strength and some resources.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you about growth in your company. So you mentioned that you guys acquired another company. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about that process, what you guys looked at. I was talking to a gentleman just a couple days ago, Alan Crawford, and he was talking about how when they took over a company, there was a lot of the, oh yeah, everything's great here, money's just coming in, it's this strong machine. And then once they acquired the company, things, he started to find out things that weren't as upfront with. So what was your experience going through with all that? And then did you have something similar? And then as far as as you guys prepare to grow for the future, what kind of metrics do you look at as far as bringing in more guys? I know we talked briefly before we started recording that right now it's hard to get people to come in, but what kind of things are you looking at to be able to make sure the company is growing?
Sure. A little history. We spent the first 20 years, I should say the first 5 years, we were always somewhere under $1 million, right? Just trying to grow a business and establish some client base. And as we got into year 5 through, say, maybe year 20 or so, we just kind of always hovered around $7 million a year with maybe 50 guys in the field. And that was kind of our sweet spot. We wanted to grow bigger, but at the time, we were profitable. We were able to take care of our clients, and we just kind of plateaued there for a while. When Dad retired, we met with a strategic planner at that point, and we kind of looked at the statistics about the success of second-generation businesses. And I know I mentioned that before, but the success rate on Generation 2 is pretty small. And because most of the time you lose focus, maybe everything that made Generation 1 successful didn't get transferred to Generation 2. And so we kind of took it on as a challenge, because here Dad retired in 2000, and we knew we needed about 6 or 7 years to pay him off for the company. And so those first 6 or 7 years were, certainly a pressure point for me personally. It's like, I'm not going to fail my dad, right? He established all of this, and no matter what business does, no matter what the economy does, we have got to make sure we pay him off and give him the nest egg that he worked so hard for. And so as we did that, we recognized that we needed to grow. So that 7 million sort of turned into 8, and then 10, and then 12, and then 15. And we kind of got to around 12 or 15 million for several years. And again, it's not necessarily the number of revenue. It's really about, at the end of the day, how profitable are you, right? If your revenue is up but your expenses are up and you're not making money, then it doesn't really matter if you're bigger.
Right.
So we were always looking at the need to grow and get bigger, but we also felt the importance of making sure that we were profitable at the end of the day, so we could pay our people well and make sure we took care of getting Dad paid off. So our growth kind of accelerated in 2016 and 17, and that's kind of where the story began to turn a little bit. We were excited because we were pushing up against about 20 million those years, but the downside of all that was we had 2 or 3 jobs go really bad on us for several different reasons. Some of them weren't estimated right. Had some change in leadership on one where somebody left, and then we had another one where the general contractor went through about 4 different superintendents, and every time that happened, there's loss of information and the job gets set back. So in 2017 and 18, we went through a financial struggle, and at that time, I honestly can tell you, we did not know if we were going to survive. We had 3 jobs that just were so bad, it was taking all of the resources that we had built up for 30 years, and it was a struggle, and there were lots of restless nights of sleep, and I knew God was there. I knew he was at work, and I knew he was testing our character and developing that character in these times. And there were times where we had people taking pay cuts. We had some of our people not taking income for a little while, and I just wasn't sure whether or not we were going to pull through all of this. And it just sort of helped me open my eyes to, it's not just about how big can you get, right? It's, are you honoring the Lord? And I don't know that we got our eyes off the ball as much as maybe we just weren't paying as close of attention as we needed to with some of the work that we had going on. So in the hype of getting a lot of work and suddenly getting bigger again, we found ourselves in a real crisis financially. And at the time, I really didn't know if we were going to pull through, but we had been out at the airport now for about 6 or 7, maybe 8 years, and the airport and one of the general contractors asked us to do a really big job, and a job bigger than we'd ever done before. And I was at this crux in my business life, like, okay, I'm financially weak. I'm going to take on the biggest job I've ever taken on, and is this the right decision? So we prayed as an ownership team, and we knew we had to get through a couple of decisions. Will our bonding company support the bond? Will our banking company support us because they both knew that we were struggling. There was no hiding it from them. So we went to the contractor at the time and just very open book with him, said this is where we're at. And the airport believed in us, the contractor believed in us, the bank and the bonding company believed, and they were willing to take the risk. And I kind of saw that. Looking back now, I see it more, but at the time I'm like, okay, Lord, you didn't shut the door, so hopefully I'm walking through the door that you want me to walk through. Now that I'm a few years back, I can see God did a lot of things in those days and in those weeks and months to prepare us for that. So we came through that job, and that was right at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. And we had just finished this job. We had a pretty good job out of all of it, and COVID hit. And so here we were, we had sort of stabilized a little bit of the ship financially, but we weren't on solid ground by any stretch. And we're like, wow, what is this going to do to us now? Because with our service team, our 24/7 service team, they were in a lot of retail and industrial space where when COVID hit, if you remember early 2020, everybody shut down. So all the things that we were going in and doing just stopped overnight.
Yep.
And suddenly our service team was incredibly slow. We had construction projects that were ready to start at the beginning of the year, which is often a typical scenario at the beginning of the year. Lots of things gear up, and all that got stalled or stopped or even canceled. So here we were again, right? Trying to figure out, okay, Lord, we've got a little bit of less water out of the ship, but we're still struggling. And it just honestly took a couple of relationships out of the new department, the new area I talked about in our low voltage. There was a opportunity to step into some work that offered a little bit less competition and a little bit more margin, a little bit more profit for us. And so where we thought we were going to have huge gaps, God just provided. And it was 100% based on some relationships that some of our team had with some people that said, hey, we need this. Can you do it? And at the time, we didn't have a lot of other stuff going. So we're like, yeah, let's go do that. And God blessed that more than what we could ever imagine, more than we anticipated. And that part of our business, that low voltage business, has really taken off and has been a part of sort of rebuilding and restabilizing. And today we're significantly stronger than we were. We recognized, when this all went down about 3 years ago, we probably had a 5 or 6 year journey to get financially healthy again. And so we're in sort of year 3 of that, maybe year 4 of that, and we see God at work, and we're thankful, so thankful. And it's not because the dollars are there, it's just because He walked us through a time where we didn't see the end. Or actually, we saw the end. We saw the edge of the cliff. But God had something different. And so now we look back and say, wow, God, you did something that we could not have anticipated. We could not have guessed this is what we'd be doing. And it's been a journey. So here we are at the peak of 2019 on that big job. We were as large as we had ever been. We had about 125 people on the payroll. And today, here I am about 2 years post that. I've got about 75 on the payroll. So people would say, oh man, that's a huge decrease in size. And it is. But for the work that God has provided, and for the team that we have, and for the difficulty in finding people, I'm really grateful for the journey God put me through. And I don't need to be a big company, right? I'll be wherever God wants, and whatever number of people that means. I just want to be a good steward. You mentioned about trying to find people. There is a lot of work out there right now. And like every other industry, whether it's restaurants, hospitals, stores, everybody's looking for help, and construction's no different. And so we could easily be bigger right now. I could easily put more people in the field and add some office staff, but those are hard to find right now. And I don't want to just hire because somebody can fog a mirror or move a pencil. Again, I go back to culture. If these people don't fit, then I'm not going to bring them into my company. So so those are some challenges. Those are some of the roads that we've been through, but I'm grateful for what God has what God has done and what He's doing right now. Really grateful. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people always forget, say myself included, that as far as when you have a business, it's like people will talk about like the statistics about failing in the first 3 years. So it's like, okay, if we can make it past the first 3 years, like great, everything's going well. But even to what you mentioned as far as like once you hit that second generation, it's where you even see, just even historically, it's like, I think it was Kodak was one of the largest businesses, and then here comes the digital camera, and they died right away. And it's like, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how big you are.
Yeah.
It's if you are like, one, if God's not looking out for you, if you're not taking care of the work that you have in front of you, it does not matter how long you've been in that space. You can still go.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the interesting things about our trade being electrical is that there's so much dynamic change in our industry, especially with technology, whether it's smart homes, which now become smart businesses, right? Power over Ethernet lighting, PoE lighting. So instead of bringing power to your light fixtures to make them turn on, you're able to bring Cat6 cable, like a computer cable, to that same light and make it turn on, and you can control it. So our trade, both in the electrical world and even more so in the low voltage world, is so dynamic and is changing so fast that I'm always encouraging our craftsmen and our office team, you've got to be in a learn mode right now, because more and more things are getting connected to the internet, and more things are getting faster and better. And it affects our trade, where it doesn't affect painters and drywallers. In electrical and low voltage, it changes constantly.
Yep.
And that's kind of what makes it fun. It kind of makes it fun. And again, the idea of being able to take fiber right to the end device, where you can connect a camera, or you can connect a Wi-Fi, or you can connect an intercom system or a phone system, all that kind of stuff on fiber is fascinating. And that's kind of some of the work that we're pushing into now, is how do we get out in front of that and kind of help lead our industry. Yeah.
When I was with the window and door company, we were doing, it was like 7-8 figure homes, primarily, like 95% of it was that. Anyways, seeing some of those cabinets that they have set up in these residential homes, where it's like, you're installing that much low volt for a residential house. It's like, then just switching to the commercial, like even going to like a airport, you got to be like, how many cabinets are you guys dealing with on that? How much, like the scale of that must be insane with how much they're trying to then integrate, now that everyone's like, oh wait, you can make what happen with my cameras, or how much can be integrated, all that good stuff. I'm sure that scale has just grown exponentially year over year.
One of the things that we've found is the technology that we're pushing to our clients is called passive optical network, or passive optical LAN. And that's the idea of bringing fiber all the way to the end user. It's been in the industry for years, trying to get, telephone and cable service out to rural communities. Well, all of a sudden now we're able to bring it right into the business, right, or right into the industry. And all of a sudden, the type of speed, the terabit speed of this fiber, the shelf life of that fiber is there's really no end to it at this point. Whereas if you put in blue Cat5 or Cat6 cable, eventually the technology that you're connecting to that cable won't be able to produce fast enough, right? So there's a shelf life for that. And that's kind of what's fun in this PON world, or POL world, is that you don't right now you don't see the end of the ability of that fiber to deliver that kind of speed and to connect everything to it. It's just really cool stuff. If you like cameras, you like connectivity, you like Wi-Fi, all this wireless stuff, it's a fascinating thing to be a part of these projects and doing some of that.
Yeah, and I know Matt Ducharme had mentioned fiber to me before, and I'm sure it was probably from your conversation with him, but what exactly is it? Because I saw Cat5, I saw Cat6, and everyone was bragging about how fast that would make things in these residential houses. But is it along the same lines as far as you're running low voltage wire that looks very similar to the Cat5, Cat6, or is it something completely different?
It's different in the fact that Cat5, Cat6 is just a string of stranded copper conductors, right? Almost like you would in your receptacles or outlets in your house, your light switches and stuff. It just brings low voltage across that same set of copper conductors. Whereas fiber is more of it's a glass tube, right? And it's thin. It's about maybe a little bit more than the size of a strand of hair, but the fiber itself is about that size, and the coating on the outside would be a little bit bigger. But you'd be shocked when you see terabit kind of speed coming through this tiny little piece of flexible glass. And so when we work with fiber, we have to have guys that are trained to pull that fiber. It doesn't bend. You can't just bend it like you can other kinds of wire, because you might break the fiber. So anytime you're working with fiber, as soon as you get it installed, you got to test that fiber from end to end to make sure that the fiber is in good shape and hasn't been broken or damaged in any way, to make sure that you can maximize that kind of terabit speed. But it's fascinating stuff, and when we can take it all the way to the end device and eliminate as much copper as we can, then we know that the performance is going to be better, and it's really set up as technology improves more and more and gets faster and faster. That fiber is designed to support that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love how insane everything's getting just with the speed.
It's cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember how everyone was like talking about Cat 6 or whatever. It's like, you're never going to need anything larger than this. And you just keep looking around and you're like, they keep designing things, whether it's through, if it's like the whole 5G stuff where it's like, oh, this is going to be faster than whatever you need. It's like, no, we're going to design things that have such large sizes that are going to challenge it. So it's interesting to see, like, we're ahead of it now on the fiber side.
Yeah. So much of that too brings in the ability for the end user to control and monitor things. They don't necessarily have to be on site. So for instance, say it's a water park. Somebody back in another state at some kind of a corporate headquarters can monitor the quality of the water or the temperature of that water, or if a pump is not working, or somebody turns something off, or there's an emergency and a ride needs to be shut down. Through the connectivity of fiber and all that kind of stuff, the speed and the ability to control that and to see all that from anywhere in the world. So some of the work that we do with some of the hotels here in town, we help monitor their camera systems. And at any point, if the hotel calls and says, hey, we've got a camera that's not pointing towards elevator number 3, we can go in remotely. We can look at that camera and see, okay, we got a problem with that camera, or somebody bumped it, or the lens went bad, or some function of the camera is not working right. So we can sometimes fix that remotely, and if it can't be fixed remotely, then we know somebody's got to be dispatched. But the ability to see all that without having to be on site really helps the end user with support, and that's just another area that the industry continues to grow and press into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how many people do you have on the admin side who can, like, obviously you said you're taking care of a lot of the culture. I'm sure you've got plenty of other things that you're doing in your day-to-day, but as far as if you need people to address, you've got a hotel that calls you with an issue or whatever the customer's request is, how much do you have office administrative work compared to in the field workers?
We count our office team as about 17 or 18 people. Now, some of those are field project managers that spend most of their time out in the field, but nonetheless, they're part of our office team. So we have 17, 18 that we call office. The rest of those would be all craftsmen, men and women in the field that are actually turning the tools. Some of them are more on the electrical side. Some of them are more on the low voltage side. What we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years since we brought on the low voltage is trying to get our electricians to learn low voltage, trying to get our low voltage to learn electrical, so that they're diversified, so that they can manage. What we don't want is silos in our company. So even though I have 3 verticals, I have electrical, service, and I have low voltage, I don't want there to be people working inside of silos. I want there to be a crossover, like we all support one another, right? We're not competing divisions. Is there some healthy competition? Absolutely. We have some fun with that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we all work together. So I have project managers that will do project manage work in any of those 3 categories. We have craftsmen in the field that will one day be installing electrical, and the next day they're over installing low voltage. So the more our team can diversify and support all parts of the company, the more valuable they become, and actually the more fun it is for them too. So yeah.
That's awesome. So do you guys have them trained, as far as, do you send a guy from the low volt crew to hang out with the electrical crew for a day or week, or and then kind of vice versa, or how does that work?
Yeah, we'll try to cross-train as much as possible. Sometimes that would be an in-class training. Sometimes even with all the COVID, it might be more of a webinar type training. But if we can get guys to integrate in the field so that if we can find jobs that have both electrical and low voltage, we'd like to do both on that job, because now we can integrate our guys. So guys that are working on the electrical can come over and be a part of the low voltage team on the same job site. But we do a lot with our training. In the low voltage world, there's a lot of certifications. So the camera systems we work with, you got to have guys that have been through their classes and are certified installers. Same with Wi-Fi, phone systems, security devices, access control.
And is that just understanding the processes that go into it? Because if I understand correctly, like my brother just got his journeyman's card back in May. Like that's more on the side of you need to understand what's happening so you don't kill yourself and burn a structure down.
Yep.
A whole bunch of other people. So whereas on the low volt side, the way I always understood it was it's more you need to understand what it is so that it functions well.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
Okay.
You want to understand how it works, how it functions, and if there's if there's difficulty with it, how do you troubleshoot through most of that? And by having certified installers, it also gives you access to the tech support team, right? So if you do have an issue, you got something you're not able to get working, or maybe it's defective and it needs replacement, it gives you access to the tech support team. Without those certifications, you're not going to get tech support. So again, that's more prevalent in the low voltage world. But even with our electrical guys, we're always trying to push in and say, what can we teach you about new codes that have come out, right? What's the national code saying? What's the state and local codes? What are the inspectors wanting to see right now? What's changed? Or it's new product, right? Sometimes guys are really resistant about new product. And sometimes you got to teach them and bring people in to say, hey, look, here's the value of that product. Maybe it's more labor efficient. Maybe it's lighter and not so heavy, or maybe it's easier to manage. Maybe it's more readily available. And today, right now, you got supply chain issues where it's really a struggle sometimes to get some of your basic materials that you used to go get off the shelf at a supply house. Sometimes you're waiting weeks, and sometimes you're waiting months. Sometimes they don't even have a date for you. So it's just having to be creative right now, and that's the same thing with even pricing. How do you bid a job today when you don't really know what those same materials are going to cost you 2 weeks from now?
Right.
And so we try to work really closely with our clients to say, look, our pricing is valid for this many days. And when they say, well, we can't get a decision made that fast, right? We got to take this to so-and-so who's going to take this much time. So how do you give somebody a price for today if they don't make a decision for 30 days? Well, you got to account for some of that in your pricing. So whether you carry that additional monies to say, look, we think it could go up as much as 10%. So here's the value of that 10%. When you give me your signature, we'll stop, we'll evaluate it and see, is it still good pricing? Did we have to come into that 10%? So you got to be open book, and you got to have clients that are willing to work with you on that. If the client says, nope, no matter what, when I give you a signature, that price has to be good, well, then you got to add some additional contingency into your numbers. So open dialogue, open communication, which is all about that relationship with your client, right? They understand that there's supply issues, and they understand there's labor issues. Some of them want to help carry that risk. Some of them say, I don't want to carry that risk. You take on that risk. So you just have to adjust how you approach your job on that.
Right. And it has been interesting as far as, since it is across the board, it seems that there are, I'd say in some ways, more people than almost you'd expect being understanding, just because it's not like, oh, just all my electrical guys are the ones who are saying it. It's across the board in every industry right now. So everyone's kind of having to play like, all right, I know I'm going to get hurt on this. You're going to get hurt on this. So let's see, how can we all get through this together?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be good dialogue. And it also depends, for my company, we're 100% relationship. So we get lots of people that will say, hey, I saw this building has this piece of property's got a sign out front and they're going to build this kind of a building. And we've done those before. Should we go after it? And my question is always, well, who's the general contractor? Who am I working for? Or who's the developer? Because sometimes we'll be working for the developer. And if we don't have a relationship there, we may have built 5 of those already. But if there's not a relationship established, I'm probably not going to go pursue that work. It doesn't say I won't, but I'm usually following relationships. And the reason that that's important goes back to the pricing side of things and the labor side of things. If you've got that relationship with your client, you can sit across the table and say, look, how do you want to manage this risk? How do we want to lock in pricing? Like, let's say you're not able to get a signature for 30 days, but you know the job's going to go. Why don't we lock in pricing on this specific type of thing, whether it's copper wire, or it's some kind of pipe, or it's light fixtures and things like that. Sometimes because of the relationship, they'll work with you to lock that stuff in even before you necessarily get a contract in place. So when you got relationship-driven clients, then those conversations are a whole lot easier than when I'm sitting across the table from someone I've never met, have no history with him, and he has no history with me, and you're making decisions with hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake.
Right, yeah.
Makes a big difference when the relationship's been established.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then when you're looking forward, where do you want to see the company go, as far as you've talked multiple times about being able to hand it off to the third generation, but even if we were to kind of shorten it up to say 5, 10, and then we'll go kind of the long term with the third generation. But as far as, like, I know it's always horrible to forecast because it's like, all right, well, we didn't see COVID coming out of anywhere. We didn't see the whole supply chain issues. But as far as if things were in your ideal world and with what you guys are trying to pursue right now, what direction are you trying to move forward in?
The success rate of Generation 3 statistics is really frightening, right? So the odds would tell you that those transitions don't very frequently happen, at least not in private businesses. Public businesses are different, right? Some of those people are established years in advance, and you got boards of directors and all that kind of stuff. In a small company, family-owned business, the success rate of Generation 3 is really low. And we're very candid about that with Generation 3. And again, I'm grateful that he is he's focused, he works hard, he has that same work ethic that his grandpa had, and that I've tried to instill in him, to say, look, you've got to be able to stay focused and focus on the important things, which is your culture of the company and the people you have working for you, right? Hire the very best people you can find and make sure they fit well within your company. So as we begin to look down the road, right, this, say, 10 or 12-year journey down the road where Generation 2 wants to begin to back out, we're doing everything we can with Generation 3 to put him in front. So every time there's an owner meeting, every time there's a director meeting, which is kind of that next level of leadership, Generation 3 is always in those meetings. Not necessarily because he has a lot of experienced input. Sometimes he gives great input because now we have a younger perspective coming in, which is very valuable. But there's times where he's just listening to how we process this. How do you?
He needs that seat time, and you're allowing him to get it
Exactly.
before just saying, "Here's the keys. Good luck."
Exactly. Yep. He's hearing and absorbing, and in his own way, he's processing things. Whether it's the struggle of a job, or it's, do we want to go pursue that client, or we got some financial crisis, right? We got a job going bad, or we got some internal strife with an employee, or whatever it is. How do we handle supply chain? How do we handle labor when we can't find more people? For him to listen and process all of that is only establishing roots in his own way. Now, whether he chooses to stay right down the same path and just keep growing it, or maybe God has something different for him and he's going to go decide to do something different in the industry, I'm okay. I really am okay with that. I'm just trying to give him the shade of the tree, so the umbrella is as wide as I can get it. And I'm trying to give him the deepest roots I can give, right? So that he can weather some of the storms. He's going to have a branch break off. He's going to lose a limb here and there off the tree, but he can weather the big things by giving him the foundation. And so that's really where we're trying to pour in, is who are those people that are going to be with him during that transition? Where's that middle level of leadership that's going to be there in that transition? Who are the new people coming in? They're going to be there. And then by putting him to the front as much as we can, so that even if the people don't necessarily hear him all the time, they see him as part of that transition. And that's one of the things we just talked about as we're getting ready to strategic plan for 2022. We do that in January every year. One of the questions we ask our core group of leadership is, how do you feel about the direction of the company? And how do you feel about the future leadership of the company? And that's done in such a way so that we can begin to see, how do they vision Generation 3, right? And some of those things are easy fixes, and some of those things you're going, wow, that's not who he is. That's not really necessarily where the company's at. But it gives you an idea of the way you want to shape and grow and build and set him up for success. So that's kind of how we're approaching getting it ready for this transition. So far, it's been a great process. And what you can't see is what's the economy going to do, right? How bad is labor really going to get before it starts to get better and that kind of stuff. But those are all things that, you just say, God, you got me here for a reason. And these are things that you know about, and I'm going to be faithful. And I'm going to show up every day, do my very best for you, and you're going to fix me as I break down along the way.
Yep.
So
day by day, step by step.
Day by day.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've just crossed an hour, so we've got a couple questions to finish off real quick. What's been the most impactful thing you've learned?
Oh, wow. I think through the recognition of our chaplain, I think maybe he just elevated my understanding of how we have to care for our team more than just Monday through Friday, that it really does become part of your extended family. So I think through him and through just having dialogue with him, and he never shares any details about who he's talking to, but I see the impact that he has on our team. So maybe one of the best things I've learned in business is you can't do it all yourself, right? Sometimes God puts people in your life that do things better than you because he's gifted them that way, and you got to be able to turn those things over and trust that God's doing a powerful thing. And so through the chaplaincy program, it's probably one of the strongest messages God's ever sent is, I have someone here that can do this for your team, and let him go minister, right? And so I'd say that's probably one of the most impactful things.
What's your favorite movie?
Wow. Let's see. I always like, the era of the 15th, 16th century. So I like, things around the Robin Hoods and the Vikings and the Bravehearts and that kind of stuff. So I like that kind of genre of movies. I also like the goofy, silly, stupid stuff like the Napoleon Dynamites and the and the Nacho Libres. So I don't know that I have one with 5 grandkids right now. Most of my movie time is around Disney and Paw Patrol and that kind of stuff. But I always enjoy a good movie.
That's awesome. What's your first character strength that comes to mind?
I think I try to be a good listener. I try to hold my tongue a little bit and use the 2 ears and the 1 mouth concept, and try to really listen to people.
And then what team is going to win the Super Bowl this February?
Oh, Cardinals all the way, man. It's our year. It's our year. With or without Larry Fitzgerald, we're going to win it this year.
Yep. And then where can people contact you or follow what you guys are doing?
Can follow us at KortmanInc.com, and also we've got social media platforms on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. You can follow us any of those places. You can always feel free to contact our office if you want to learn more about you. I'm always open to sharing business ideas. I'm always open to learning and seeing what other people are doing and people that are being successful in those things. So please reach out and be happy to build a relationship with you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you for the time.
All right, that's all we have for today. But if you like the show, please subscribe, tell a friend, and until next time, I hope your hammer stays accurate, your Wi-Fi fast, and you work blessed. See you, everybody.